The entire climate agenda actually has nothing to do with the climate. It's not like this was a tyrannical response to a threat. It was the creation of an artificial threat to exercise tyrannical power itself. Okay, it's a religious cult. And so I've said this numerous times, I think the climate religion has about as much to do with the climate as the Spanish Inquisition had to do with Christ, which is to say nothing at all. It was really just about power and dominion and punishment all the way down. And I can basically prove that to you in a short amount of time, right? If the climate religion
do it.
really, I mean, just I'm gonna, to avoid going on for hours, I'll just pick a couple of tidbits, but we could go on for hours, but the couple tidbits we can just start with are, so one is, if you really care about carbon emissions as the end all be all, okay, first of all, you'd be delineating which kind of carbon emissions matter. I don't subscribe to the tenets of this religion, but I understand this religion. I think it's worth understanding a religion even if you're not a practitioner. Even if you subscribe to this religion, there's a difference between methane leakage and carbon dioxide. Well, methane leakage is far worse in places like Russia and China. So then it should be a mystery that you want to shift carbon production from the United States, where you tell companies like Exxon and Chevron to stop producing, to places like China, like PetroChina on the other side of the world.
Yep.
And by the way, this is exactly what the ESG movement, it's like the apostles of this church, right? So BlackRock is like an apostle of this Spanish Inquisition style church. BlackRock forces companies like Exxon and Chevron to drop oil production to meet net zero standards by 2050. Yet literally some of the same companies buying up those same projects on the other side of the planet are PetroChina, who BlackRock is a large shareholder of, without telling PetroChina to adopt any of those same emissions caps. This is nuts if you think that you care about reducing carbon emissions. And it's not even, as I was alluding to methane emissions before, it's not even net neutral. Methane, even if you subscribe to this crazy religion, is 80 times worse for global warming than carbon dioxide. So it's not even net neutral, it's worse. So that's the first breadcrumb that there's something else going on here. The second breadcrumb that there's something else going on here is that same movement, certainly its apostles in the ESG movement, that are so hostile to carbon emissions, is also hostile to the best known form of carbon-free energy production known to mankind, which is nuclear energy, right? So that's the second little breadcrumb that suggests there's something else going on here. And the problem with nuclear energy in a nutshell is that nuclear energy might be too good at solving the alleged clean energy problem, such that it doesn't solve for the actual agenda, which is delivering equity between the West, America in particular, and the rest of the world to catch up. That's really what this climate is all.
And delivering that power that we've been talking about.
Of course.
In the hands of the proper elite.
The Grand Inquisitors of our time, right? So that's really what's going on.
Those are two stunning points.
Do you not see what demonic filth this Goya is selling?
Do you painters not become very intimate with your models?
Beyond the canvas.
My daughter Ines has been summoned by the Holy Office.
Ines, that's preposterous.
You've insisted a number of times that the climate narrative is a religious or quasi-religious structure. So why don't you, I've got some thoughts about that, which I'll share eventually, but I would like you to lay out why you use that terminology specifically.
Yeah, so I mean that in two senses. Worse is the sense in which it is a religious institution gone awry. And then the second is in which it fills a psychological need for religion and God in the everyday person. On the first of those, just as you were laying out the philosophical framing of it, I was reminded of actually one of my favorite stories about Christ, actually, which came from not the Bible, but from Fyodor Dostoevsky's book, The Brothers Karamazov, Brothers K.
Brothers Karamazov.
In his chapter entitled The Grand Inquisitor, actually. And it tells the story of how Christ comes back to earth during the 15th or 16th century or whatever in Seville, Spain. He's walking the streets, performing miracles, and then the Grand Inquisitor, a person leading the Spanish Inquisition, spots him on the street and has him arrested. And the whole climax of the chapter is the dialogue between Christ and the Grand Inquisitor. And what the Grand Inquisitor tells Christ is, look, we the church don't need you here anymore. You are supposed to be a symbol that helps us do our work, but your presence here actually stops us from getting our work done. And he sentences Christ to execution the next morning. swapping climate for Christ, which really is what's happening in the psychological minds of people who are buying this religion up, which I'll get to in a second, but that's also what's going on here is the climate's just an excuse. And in fact, once you get into a discussion about actually addressing carbon emissions, say with nuclear energy, they get very worried. So they're sentencing nuclear energy to death because that's their messiah and their savior, right? You said you wanted to actually get rid of carbon emissions. Well, you would welcome the second coming of Christ, the second coming of the climate solution of nuclear energy. No. They sentence it to death because as the Grand Inquisitor told Christ in that story, your presence here actually impedes our work. You're just supposed to be a symbol for us. So in a certain sense, it has a religious quality in terms of the church that protects its own turf, even from the very God that it tells its parishioners to worship. Now, the second question, though, is why are the parishioners worshiping at all? And I think this gets to the heart of, in a weird way, my candidacy for president of the United States, even though we're in deep philosophical terrain here. I just think we're in the middle of this identity crisis where we are so hungry for purpose and meaning and identity as Americans and it's probably true for much of the Western world too, even beyond America, but we're so hungry for a cause at a moment in our history when the things that used to fill that void, faith is one of them. Faith in God is a big one. But patriotism is also a big one. National identity is big. Family is also pretty big in this category. Even hard work, actually. We can get into that later, but these are sources of identity, sources of pride, sources of grounding. They're grounded in truth. And the way I look at us as human beings, this is the first personal reflection, right? We're like blind bats. We're lost in some cave in an abyss, and we send out these sonar signals for our echolocation of identity, right? We can't see where we are, but we deduce where we are by bouncing off the signals we send and get them back as sources of truth. Okay, I send a signal out, family is one source of identity I get back. God is another source of identity I get back. My nation is another source of identity I get back. My hard work, the things I create in the world, these things, we deduce our identity, and it tells us, even though we're blind, where we are, lost in that abyss. But when those things disappear, we send out that signal, and then nothing comes back. And then we're lost. And so then we start grasping at artificial sources of that identity, racial identity, gender identity. Where do you think this bizarre gender ideology happens to have arisen from? Climate, disaster, catastrophism. That's a source of identity too. Climate instead of Christ. And so it's no accident that we see all of these secular religions arise at the same time. Why do we see wokeism at the same time as we see radical gender ideology, racial wokeism as gender ideology, as climatism, as COVIDism? It's a symptom of that deeper abyss that we're lost in.